Greetings and welcome to Grains of Dirt podcast, episode number 4. Last time I broke away from what I was talking about, the Christ code that I was talking about, to talk about this crisis that's been going on with regards to the rioting and the protests. But today I want to get back to what we were talking about before that, this thing called the Christ code. If you remember, I introduced an acronym by which we can remember categorical evidences that support the Christian faith and the Bible. That acronym is CHRIST, hence the term Christ code that I'm using. And we began with the first letter of the Christ code, the letter C, as the first category of evidence that supports Christianity and the Bible. And the C stands for creation and conscience. The Christian faith and the Bible are fundamentally and objectively supported in our observation of creation and also through our conscience. Last time I spoke about how miracles mentioned in the Bible reveal to us God's attributes, but I also mentioned how natural and physical laws and how the complexity of creation points to a purposeful creator, a purposeful designer of all things. We see order and we see law, physical law. We see logic and purpose. We see unity through diversity, through symbiosis. Symbiosis is the interaction between two different organisms living in a close physical association that to benefit them both, like how plants produce oxygen to sustain us as human beings, and we produce ourselves carbon dioxide that helps to sustain the lives of plants. Random chaos created from a big bang cannot explain this order, nor can the theory of Darwinian evolution. So we just tend to take these things as humans, we tend to take these things for granted, but order never spawns from chaos by some random accident. Therefore, the Big Bang and this idea that an explosion occurring somewhere somehow from a single point in not even the universe, outside the universe, where nothingness created all matter and life in the universe, that's kind of foolish. It takes total blind and foolish faith to believe that than to believe in the eternal, purposeful God that created all things. But we also assume things like universal morality and ethics. But where does morality come from? When we all kind of expect people to live by a moral code, we are exercising that internal knowledge that we expect a morality in people. We all have this sense of a universal right and wrong. Even the atheist will say it's wrong to take what belongs to him or to kill one of his loved ones. And he won't just say this because it's against our human law, but it's morally wrong. Just as when Hitler killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, it was legal according to the nation's laws because he was the leader of that nation. It was legal for him to murder those 6 million Jews, but it was morally wrong whether you were living in that country or not. American slavery was legal, yet many knew it to be morally wrong. People were kidnapped and forced into slave labor based upon the color of their skin and treated less than human. We know that's wrong, even if it was legal in this country for a period of time. The Bible declares that that is wrong as well. And on a side note, those who will use the Bible to try to defend American slavery, or those who used the Bible back in the day to defend American slavery, they were pulling texts out of context and misapplying what the author of Scripture contextually intended. But I'll talk about more about that in another podcast. My point here today is that if we are all just biological accidents, if our thoughts are just the result of chemical reactions and random electrical activity in our brains, then how do we share a common understanding of the concept of moral absolutes? We may disagree over what those moral absolutes are. That is the result of the fall of mankind, the result of sin entering the world and corrupting our understanding of God's moral law. but we all live our lives expecting society to function under a code of moral absolutes. Some will say, as a society, that we recognized the value of moral law and order so that our species would survive. And that's why we have universal moral law. But again, if we're all just biological bags of dirt bumping into each other with no real purpose, what does it matter if our species survives? Why would we care as a species if the if we survive as a species? If evolution is true and survival of the fittest is the standard, then striving to keep the species in existence would actually go against one's personal survival interest. I mean, if we help others, then that means there's more competition for food, water, and for land. Self-sacrifice for others does not comport with survival of the fittest or the evolutionary model. Um, some have tried to live that way with a survival of the fittest type mentality, such as Adolf Hitler. But that was because people like that had hardened their conscience, had hardened their hearts so much to a point that they were given over to that absolute contempt for all living things. So you see, we are all born with a conscience. Conscience. It's two words: con meaning with, and science meaning knowledge. So we are born with knowledge, with the knowledge of right and wrong, of moral absolutes. And the Bible actually talks about this in Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 15. It says, "For when Gentiles who do not have the law," speaking of the law of God that was given to Israel, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law unto themselves, even though they do not have the law, the written law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. So that means that we all know there is a universal morality that we are supposed to be living by. It amazes me when I hear atheists claim they are trying to do what's right, or maybe they believe themselves to be good people. But by what standard do they measure what is right? By what standard do they consider themselves to be good? That's very subjective. Someone will try to argue and say, well, we all hold to different universal moral laws. For example, some believe there's nothing wrong with sex outside of marriage or homosexual sex, while others assert these as being universally morally wrong. If it's written upon our collective conscience, then everyone should agree that it's wrong, correct? That would be the argument of the atheist. Well, the Bible actually addresses that issue, that inconsistency we have in our understanding of a universal moral law. The Bible addresses that. In Romans 1:18, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness from men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." See, in our fallen world, part of our sin is suppressing the truth that is written upon our conscience by God, and we are hardening our hearts to that truth because of our love for sin. And speaking of those who reject God, the Bible says this in Romans 1:21, "For although they knew God," even the atheist, "they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." So because man has loved his sin so much, he has suppressed the knowledge of God and God's law written on our hearts, so that certain sins, such as sexual sins, are suppressed in the heart and not seen as sin by the sinner that loves his sin. Man tries to justify this subconscious suppression of truth by subscribing then to a naturalistic worldview. Because if someone is naturalistically born with certain such sexual tendencies, that is not seen as wrong in the naturalistic mindset. In that view, the creation becomes God. The creation becomes the creator. Man himself becomes the one who determines what is right and what is wrong. And it's from that view that things like Darwinian evolution and the Big Bang come in and create presuppositions in man's sinful thinking, whereas we try to eliminate the one true living God from our psyche, from our mindset. From this, we credit all of creation to creation itself. And this is what worship is, whereas we are giving absolute credit for our existence to something, for our purpose to something. And in the evolutionary worldview, man is worshiping creation, birds, apes, worms, fish, etc., just as Romans 1:23 said. The naturalistic evolutionist believes creation created itself, and this is utterly illogical. For creation to create itself, it would have to have existed before it was even created. And that, of course, is a logical fallacy. It makes no sense. So there you have one of the self-contradicting points of a naturalistic worldview. We know the universe had a beginning point and is winding down. The law of entropy, among other things, shows us that this is happening. We can observe that scientifically. However, something had to cause matter to come into existence and begin this process. All things that are caused require something to have caused them to come into being. Therefore, the ultimate cause of all things must be eternal in its nature. And the ultimate cause of all things, therefore, could not have had a cause itself, because it's eternal. It must have always existed. All things caused require an uncaused cause. This is the cosmological argument for God. And the common response to the argument is the question of what then caused God to come into existence. And that's the point. God was not caused. He is eternal. He is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. He never had a cause or beginning, and he will never have an end. Now, some will claim the universe is also eternal and that it just keeps expanding and collapsing over and over again for eternity. But a cause is still required for this to happen. And the order and the physical laws that come from this can't be explained. The universe doesn't have a mind in itself to determine these things. Something caused this to happen, if it did happen this way. The order does not result from random chaos. If a tornado blows through a scrap metal junkyard, you will never ever get a fully functioning jet airplane as a result. Yet, this is what the naturalistic evolutionary worldview requires you to believe, even on a much more complex level. To believe in evolution is what brought about human beings and life. The evidence for God's existence, therefore, is overwhelming. I don't need to provide evidence for the proof of God, because his existence is not on trial here. We are not the judge of whether or not God has provided sufficient evidence. God is our judge. God knows that we know that he is God. God knows that we know that we have sinned against him. So I'm not trying to prove God, but I'm trying to reveal the foolishness of denying his existence. And Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool has said in his own heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good." So I'm hoping that God uses this podcast to bring glory to himself. I pray this podcast will strengthen the faith of believers and weaken the false faith of unbelievers. So I'm out of time right now, but I will continue this creation and consciousness idea next time. And again, if you want to check out my other videos, go to Grains of Dirt Ministries at YouTube. And God bless. Have a great day.